Hello, Chance. Um, it's actually, even though it was like raining for the majority of the day, it's actually pretty pleasant right now. I hope everyone's doing okay. I am ending my work day. I was going to try to do this at lunch, but uh, ended up doing a lot of work and lost track of time. So, spoiler alert, I was going to do 2 episodes today. I was going to do one episode, this episode, and then I was going to do another at this time. And then, have it all plotted out for today and maybe tomorrow, but, it just wasn't meant to be. I will say, chat, something that this podcast will be in different places next week. If you know, you know. If you don't, it will be exciting. Well, it will be extremely boring, but it will be exciting. Well, it will be exactly the same, actually, but because it's a podcast, who watches this shit? So, anyway, with all of that said, let's get to the questions. Few questions today, and man, I'm reading over these questions that I wrote down from. I was going to, like I said, I was supposed to do this pod like earlier this week, but forgot my pod stuff 2 days in a row. So I know there's like a bunch of questions I want to answer, but order of operations. You got to go first in line. I'm not saying these are bad questions. I'm saying I'm excited about all the questions that I've seen. So please continue to ask them. But a few questions today. We'll see how quickly I can get to them. Someone asked about job hopping. If you are at a job for like a year or even less, like if someone's reviewing that in your experience, how much does that get weighted against you? So it's a pretty interesting question, right? Like, I've heard from people across many industries see this like many different ways, right? In tech, there's somewhat of a culture of it. Usually it isn't like wholesale, you're leaving one company to another. A lot of the time it's like you're switching departments a lot because your team changes a lot, or the structure of your organization or company changes a good amount. So sometimes you see people jump in and out of different roles, different teams. They have a lot of different titles. So you see a lot of that. But also, like, you do see a good amount of people who jump between startups, right? Like, they worked at a big place for a bit, jumped out, got into the startup game, bounced from startup to startup with, people that they liked working with. And you have people who are just career startup people. They go into a place, they set it all up, they make a handful of cash, and then they bounce to another startup. And they just startup hop. So you do have some people who do that. And then you have people who are on the complete opposite side. You have people who stay at a place for as long as they can. A lot of people get one job and usually they just stay there for many, many years. So the perception, I would say, isn't just one perception, right? It's not like, oh, this person jumps around to all these different roles, therefore they're bad, right? Or this person has jumped around and has had different titles, they're ascending in their career, and they're going to be great, right? Like, Jesus, pigeons. There's a lot of pigeons. Okay, there's a lot of pigeons. There's a lot. Guys, it's the baseball park. There's no roof, you know. That sky's the real sky up there. So you get things that live in these seats. Just fucking. They also like could poop on you and stuff. So trying to avoid all of that. Anyway, so I would say it's not necessarily like, you know, the fact that someone moves around jobs or has a bunch of different titles within a year, or it's a frequent occurrence in their job experience, but it's usually the context of it, right? Like, if the context of it is like, oh yeah, this person, not only are they jumping around to different startups, but like they do the exact same thing at every single startup, and it's like they never grow with any of the companies that they grow with, not because they can't, but because, or not because of, usually because like their skill set is extremely specific, then like it's possible that you've just found a niche and the role, whatever full-time role you were getting at these startups, that's just the thing you do, and then once the work is done, it's done, right? Like, think about like database infrastructure people who are freelancers who come in and set up all of your database, and like it's a lot of work to make sure that everything's automated and ingesting and, you know, handing off a database operation to someone who's ultimately going to be the forever database person. That's a lot easier than asking someone to come in and set up the entire systems infrastructure, and then you're ultimately having to pay a lot more money for that one person who may or may not do a great job, right? Whereas you could like invest a good amount of money into someone starting that up, and then when their contract's over, you can find a person who oversees that specific function, and then they staff it out themselves without or with a fully operational system infrastructure, right? A database infrastructure. So that tends to be a little more bang for your buck for a lot of different startups, right? Like being able to get something going quickly with a vendor or contractor, and then after you get something going quickly with a vendor or contractor, finding people who are going to grow with your company, who also might have functions that are, or might have responsibilities or functions that are larger than just what the vendors do, right? So it's not impossible to see like why that's the case, but in the case of like, let's say you're the database person, you go around setting up these databases, and you're never getting promoted beyond just some sort of engineer. It is the context, right? Like, so why would that be happening? Is that your choice? Is that the company's choice, right? So I don't necessarily think it's bad to jump from role to role, even in sports, right? Like, it's a very volatile market in sports. Sometimes people are hiring all the time. Other times, no jobs. And on the other side of it, sometimes groups are growing in size, sometimes groups are downsizing. And it has nothing to do with the performance or the abilities of the people on the team. It has everything to do with how much money is being allocated to that particular department, right? Talking about sports analytics specifically. So, and a research and development department, if you have some particular budget size and that gets decreased, then like the hardest decisions are the decisions of personnel. So, so ultimately, like what makes people jump from job to job might not necessarily be within anyone's control, right? At least anyone who is directly related to that department. So, so that's one side, is job hopping. I don't necessarily think is anything scandalous, but I also would say that it's all context dependent, because sometimes it is scandalous. I remember this person was interviewing for a role, and there was like several of us I was helping with the hiring process. And there's, several people, different departments, assessing whether any people should go on to the next round of the interview process. And one thing that I pointed out for two people, I pointed out for this one person, like, yeah, they've bounced around many roles, and usually the roles that they're getting, like these roles that this person ends up in, like they're really good roles. These are roles that like many people would desire, but they end up staying there only for a year or two, and then they leave for something else. And somehow they've been able to parlay it into like these types of like good roles many times over, but there is no like continuity. Like, why would you leave one job for another job in the same capacity? Seems questionable to me. And then for another person, I said basically the same thing, except for this other person, they when they bounced around jobs, it wasn't exactly the same role every time, but it just didn't connect for me. Like, unlike this other person who's bouncing around to the exact same role every time they go to a different place, this other person has like so many varieties of roles, all existing within like a data space. But within the data space, there's like many differences, right? Like, you could be a data scientist, okay? You could be a data engineer, which, depending on the company, a data scientist might be someone doing like, machine learning and modeling, right? Whereas a data engineer might be strictly doing like ingestion and database related stuff, maybe even DevOps stuff, right? But those two paths usually don't cross over unless you're specifically asking for someone who can do all of this, right? So this person who had like, and their roles were even more wide than that. Like, it was all over the place. I was like, I think, unlike the person who was jumping around to the same role, I was like, I think this person like is just extremely knowledgeable, but I don't know if they're the hands-on keyboard person I would think they are. And I was shot down with both. They were like, we see your concerns. We're moving both of these candidates on to the next round. One candidate wasn't good. They just flopped. And I remember the meeting after that interview with that person, a bunch of people were like, yeah, that person, they just weren't the person. They flopped, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, do you feel like they were able to do the work if you didn't know as much as you did about this industry? Because I got a feeling, guys. Got a feeling. They could talk a really good talk. but their walk, not so great. And then with this other person, they actually ended up getting a role. And for some, they were like, this is one of the worst usages of this position this company has seen. And I was like, I mean, I would agree, but we could have avoided this. So this isn't the same right every time, but for those two, I'll always feel pretty good about my assessment of people's work experience. And neither of those people, it wasn't because they bounce around to a bunch of jobs. It was the fact that the context around all of those jobs suggested something was a little amiss. So, the hidden factor to all of this is if you just call their references, you could hear what kind of work they did, how they were perceived, how they go about things. So that's also not hard. Okay. Anyway, job hopping. All right, next question. Someone asked about in the postseason, or when we're going through the postseason, so when you're going through the playoffs, when there are so many other teams who aren't in the playoffs, how do you kind of manage or marry the two? Like, you're still focused on winning playoff games, but so many teams are focused on off-season planning. Like, how does the balance of focusing on next season versus focusing on the postseason work out? I can't speak to other teams, and honestly, I've only had this one experience on my side in the postseason, but I will say that when off-season planning does start, there is, good feel about it. Feel being like reading the room, right? For those who are uninitiated in terms of the definition of feel here. But when you're seeing who's in it and who's not, you kind of start with the teams who aren't in it if you're going to do off-season discussion stuff, because they're in the same boat as you are, right? And you really don't... I don't know. There's like those rumble strip things, or like you get too close to an edge, starts making like a rumbly sound. When big trucks go over the ones here, it makes like a really annoying like card in the spoke sound. Anyway, that's what that noise was, if you could hear it. So for the postseason and off-season planning, start with the teams who are doing like stuff. One thing that I try to do is when a team does get eliminated from the postseason, I give them a week. You get 1 week before I send a text, right? Just to see where y'all doing. Mainly because it's like, season's over, you didn't want it to end that way. Depending on, how you ended the season, who you are, you might be trying to figure out what the heck happened, right? And on top of all of that, player discussion isn't just the only thing you discuss with teams, right? Coaches switch teams, front office people switch teams. Depending on when you're listening to this, today, I guess yesterday, the news was Paul DePodesta, who was a chief strategy officer over at Cleveland Browns. He is now back in baseball as the head of baseball operations over at Colorado Rockies. So something like that happens, and other teams are also looking for stuff like that, right? Paul Tuboni was at Boston. He's new president of baseball operations over at Washington Nationals. This move here with Paul DePodesta over to Colorado. And then you have other people getting promoted, right? Paul Tuboni, he brought in 2 people as assistant general managers who he's worked with before from different teams. Surely Paul DePodesta is going to do something similar, probably requesting on people once he starts getting going, probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So you have not just players, but front office people, coaches, not just major league coaches, but minor league coaches, minor league staff. You have scouts, scouts who switch teams, scouts who get promoted, scouts who pivot to other things. So you got a good amount of movement, you know? You got a good amount of movement in the industry from different staff. So I think it's important to recognize that, you know, a week is definitely not enough time for any one organization to get their ducks in a row for the off season, but you definitely don't want to send like a text, you know, bottom of the 9th, team gets eliminated, and you're like, yo, what's up with blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just reading the room bad, you know? So you never want to read the room like that. But yeah, it is tough. It's tough to plan around. Usually, to be honest, in baseball, it's a little easy just because there is an unofficial start to the off season with the general managers meetings. So that is going to happen. You're listening to this right now, depending on when you're listening to it. Today is November. I don't know. It's a single digit number. November 6th? I don't know, champ. I don't know what day it is. But whatever today is, next week, which I think Monday is the 7th or the 8th? I don't know. But next week is the general managers meeting. So it tends to be like the unofficial kickoff to the off season for everyone. Officially, the kickoff to the off season is the end of the World Series, and then I believe one day later is when transactions begin to open up for the next season. And then over the course of the week from the last day of the World Series, or the day that the World Series ends, over the course of the week, different transaction windows begin to open. And all of those windows kind of are all the off-season windows are basically open once GM meetings begin. So GM meetings next week, you touch base with all the teams, see where everyone's at, what everyone wants to do, what the state of organization is when it comes to GM meetings. And then, you know, you're off to the races. So, really no, and that's not different for any team. Some teams are a little busier than others, but yeah, for all teams, that's usually the first touch point. And then winter meetings is a lot of when people think like, I don't know. Some people consider winter meetings as the start of the off season, mainly because that's when the biggest news kind of starts coming out. And usually at that point, you have some bigger signings. You can think of the off season for any sport as like a U shape in terms of signings, you get a lot of action at the very beginning. Then there's kind of a lull. And then towards spring training and through spring training, you get a lot of other action, which is usually like big deals that you're trying to finish, or reactionary deals because of injuries or something. So it's kind of U-shaped, and right in the middle of the off season, winter meetings is happening, where there's this kind of artificial drum of news. But in my many years of baseball, very few deals happen around winter meetings. So at least few like trades. There's a good amount of free agent signings. That typically happens randomly through the off season, but for team trades, it's usually U-shaped, mainly because like if a team doesn't have to make trades, they won't. It takes two parties to tango, you know? So okay. Honestly, I wrote that question down, the question I just answered, I wrote that down like 5 days ago. So I don't know if that's what you were asking, but if you want to re-ask that question in a different way, I'm happy to answer it again. Someone asked about job relocation and relocation fees. Like, if you get hired, do you expect, if you get hired and you're going to have to work physically in the office wherever you got hired, should you expect relocation? And this is like one of the most COVID evolved practices that I've heard of. So pre-COVID, I would say 100% absolutely. If you get a job and you're expected to move, then they should be covering moving fees. 100%, 1,000%. But since COVID, I have heard of different practices now. And one of the most different practices is that if you get hired full time, people ask, the job will ask, your employer will ask you if you want to be remote, hybrid, or on campus in person. And effectively, if you say in person, then yes, you get relocation. But if you don't say in person, then companies are using that against people. Companies are using that against people because now if you do want to be closer or on campus or move to the city your company's in, that's voluntary. You're doing that because you want to, not because the company asked you to. And I've seen that a lot. A lot of people I've talked to, all my friends across many different industries, that's something that that we've been seeing everywhere. So it's a little crazy, but post-COVID era, they're expecting people, if you're choosing to be remote or hybrid, then you're voluntarily moving to the city that your company's in, versus if you are 100% in office, then they would pay for a lot more stuff. But those come with different caveats too, right? You're held to a different standard now if you're supposed to be in office. And that's like, we're drawing all sorts of different lines in the sand that it's hard to know what's a line and what's just wind, you know? So I would say best company practices, in my opinion, is whatever allows the employee to succeed. And if they're starting a new role and even if they're remote, and if you do have stipulations around like what relocation is in terms of being remote, then I would say you should still cover relocation. Personally speaking, I think like however much money it is to cover someone's moving expenses versus starting off their job with you being the company, on the wrong foot, it unfortunately does go a long way in terms of like first perceptions, first interactions with the company, right? And you don't want to be a company where you're already, decreasing quality of life with a full-time employee who is very important to your operations, because their contributions may go from indefinite to definite, right? Like they might go from being a full-time employee who's going to be there for a long time to a full-time employee who's going to be there for not a long time, right? Just because of some interactions like this. So you should always be sensitive to these things and really lay it out for people, because if you don't, these are like, it's like hidden fees with like cell phone or, internet companies. Like, you weren't expecting this. If you have an opportunity to like make your bill cheaper, you will. But like the fact that, this kind of stuff happens and you're just not forward or upfront about stuff like this, it makes people pissed off. And like, what could you have done that would have made them not feel pissed off? Just be upfront, right? So, and whether or not that's a bigger risk because you feel like, oh, if they knew this, then maybe they wouldn't have said yes. Well, then that's just being deceitful in a different way, right? So, in my mind, you should always try to be as upfront and truthful as you can, especially when it comes to what people are expecting to pay for or what they're expecting to be reimbursed for. So, it avoids many problems down the line, I would say. Personally speaking, my views don't represent the views or actions of the Cincinnati Reds, by the way. All right, last one, and then I will mosey on to my home. Someone asked, how do you make a lot of money? So, I'm wondering this myself, but I think in all my years of making money, I think one thing has always like been an underscore to any time I've made like a lot of money. And it was like the amount of work it takes to make a lot of money is a lot. So, not to say I make a lot of money, but in my role, like what did it take to get into my role? It took a lot of work. So that's like not even underselling it. That's just, that's what it was. All the work what was the work? It was everything up to now. It was going through my classes, all my education, all my education where I was failing, learning how to fail, learning how to be resilient, working jobs, working bad jobs, having good bosses, having bad bosses, finding out like what made me successful, not just in one thing, but in many things. How can I apply transferable skills in many different directions and domains? And then optimizing. Like how can I repeat that process so I'm always making the right move? And how transferable is that from field to field, job to job, project to project, person to person? It took a lot of work to figure all of that out. And most of it was failing. Most of it was trying stuff and realizing, man, that was not the way to do it. So a lot of it was just bad luck, bad timing, bad decision making, putting your hand on the stove when you shouldn't, you know? Like, a lot of the time you're just doing it to see what would happen, and you get burned a lot. But if you're not afraid to put your hand back on the stove, then maybe something different happens because you did it a different way. You approached it a different way. You timed it a different way. So my only advice to people who want to make a lot of money, this was probably like more of a tongue-in-cheek response or tongue-in-cheek question, but in my mind, there is no substitute for work. Even in like the places where like I think I got extremely lucky to make a bunch of money, it took a lot of hard lessons. Like here's one example recently this year. So I tried to get into like, investments, right? Like stocks and whatever. And I've told chat this, but for people who don't know, many months ago, earlier this year, one of my year resolutions was to like not just have my money sit in my bank account doing nothing. Like I wanted to take a good amount of it and put it into a place where I could accrue money, whether slowly or quickly, right? Like I just wanted to accrue more money on my money. I wanted my money to do work for me. And for like a good half of the year, that's what it was. Like I was making more money doing, like I downloaded that, that app. I won't say the app, but y'all know what I'm talking about. I downloaded the app where it, buys and sells stocks based off a different portfolio of someone who's very famous who does all of this stuff. And you could pick a bunch of different portfolios. And so at the very height of me doing all of this, I had like 4 or 5 different portfolios going, and I was up a lot of money. It was a lot of money. I'll say like 150-ish% up. So take that however you want. If you want to think I put in $100, I got $250 sitting in an account, when if I didn't do that, it would just be in my checking account sitting there, right? And that was like a good half of the year. Then that's when the lessons started coming in. So I could have just continued doing this and I would have been very happy by the end of this year. It would have been fine. But I decided to go further. I was like, well, is there a way to actually do this and make even more money? Because I hear of people who are making more money in the stock market than just, this much that I'm making. So started reading more about, future markets, options, 0-day options, and I made a lot of money, and this was recent actually. I made a lot of money in my first week of doing it. And then I lost all of that money. So, and I'm happy to say what I won and lost. I went in on a call, and that call made me $10,000. So I put in like 2,000 and I made 10,000 within the week. And I was like, holy fuck, this is the kind of money that I'm talking about. But I didn't understand like puts and calls and all this stuff. I was like, maybe I'll just write it out, see how much more money I can make. Because like the estimates of this particular call wasn't like 500%. The estimates of this call was like 50, 60%. So what if I just wrote this out, you know? Not only did I lose all my money on that call, so I went from 10,000 up to literally losing my $2,000 I put in. But because I got so greedy, I had put a bunch of different calls over the course of like 2 or so weeks that I started losing more money. And now, instead of being up 150% on the year, I'm now around 20%, which is worse than the S&P 500. So that was a really hard lesson to learn. But like at the same time, I'm happy I learned it. I think a lot of people would be very, very, very angry losing, that much money, especially in that short of a time frame. But for me, I think about the resiliency of it. It's like that money's going to come back because I've put the work in, not just there. I'm not just talking in a vacuum in stocks or whatever, but in my entire life, like these are the kinds of things that just fucking happen. And if you trust that you're learning and educating yourself and you're putting your work towards the right things, then you'll make all that money back. You'll make everything you were thinking about. If it's within your means, you'll make it all back. And I believe that. Like now, looking back at those moments several weeks ago, I can very safely say that I am back. Not that much up, but I have crawled back with smarter decisions in the stock market, and it actually has made me realize that I don't need this app that I started out with at the beginning of the year. I could actually like delete that app, cancel all the membership and everything on it, and just go with the stuff I know about the stock market now, because I'm so much more well versed in stocks and options and all this stuff. Like I know how much money to invest now. If I'm doing options and futures market stuff, like how much money to invest there as a percentage of my portfolio. I've talked to a lot of people. I'm in the right Discords now. I'm not in these like weird Wall Street bets Discords anymore. So that's not what I was in. Those guys, I don't even know what the fuck's going on with those people. But I was in Discords that were probably like tangential to that. And yeah, it was a mess. And ultimately it was like gambling, right? It was like gambling, but not at a casino. Gambling, but not FanDuel. So I'm pretty happy with the decisions I made now, financially. So, and like I said, I'm not in financial ruin. This was part of my account. Now, I just know, like, all right, don't do what I just did. Probably do the long-term thing, and then every now and then make a educated guess. So, anyway, to make a lot of money, you got to do one of two things. Put in a lot of work. Work when people don't even see you're working, Like, a lot of people thought like streaming was that for me. And I wouldn't say I was doing it for my career. I was doing it for a different career, right? I was doing it for the content creation of it. But even that made me a nice chunk of change in sponsors. even if I was only streaming to like a dozen people, which is insane. So there's that, but then there's also the second piece to make a lot of money. If you aren't going to put in a ton of work, then you just got to get lucky. And that is a bad place to be if you got to rely on luck versus skill. So, all right, this pod is long, but I think that's okay. I will see y'all. If the next episode isn't from my house, the next episode will be. The next episode is not from my house. And the next episode will be somewhere else. Bye, chat.